For 40 years, they've shouted it at you. In comment sections, at dinner parties, in pub arguments that went absolutely nowhere. You won the air war with USA's Sidewinder missiles and USA's satellites, buffoons. They've called it pigeon shooting against defenseless aircraft. John Lehman's name gets thrown around like scripture, the US Secretary of the Navy who supposedly proved that America handed Britain its victory on a silver platter. The myth has calcified into something worse than received wisdom. It's become a weapon, used against British veterans, used against the memory of the campaign, used against any suggestion that operational excellence rather than foreign charity decided the outcome 8,000 miles from home. Here's what none of them ever mention. When the task force departed Portsmouth on April 5, 1982, the Royal Navy possessed exactly 19 AIM-9L Sidewinder missiles in its entire inventory. 19. For a campaign that would involve hundreds of sorties against an enemy air force with over 200 combat aircraft. The Sea Harrier clearance trials for the AIM-9L, the testing required before pilots could safely employ the weapon in combat, were completed in the final weeks before deployment. This wasn't a force swimming in American technology. This was a force scraping together whatever it could find and praying the integration would hold. But wait, what about the satellites? The reconnaissance satellites that supposedly watched the Argentine fleet and fed targeting data directly to Royal Navy commanders. Let's talk about those satellites. American hexagon reconnaissance satellites did photograph the Falkland Islands on May 31st and June 13th, 1982, but these were film-based systems, Cold War relics designed for strategic intelligence rather than real-time tactical support. The film canisters had to be physically ejected from orbit, recovered, transported to processing facilities, analyzed by intelligence specialists who had other priorities. The imagery from the June 13th pass was not analyzed in the United States until June 24th. The war ended on June 14th. The satellite intelligence that supposedly won the campaign arrived 10 days after the Argentine surrender. This isn't military assistance. This is historical irony so thick you could choke on it. And John Lehman? The man whose name gets weaponized in every argument about American technological superiority. His frequently cited quotes regarding the Falklands actually emphasized logistics and military-to-military cooperation, such as having 50 US personnel at Northwood, rather than claiming American equipment won the war. Lehman discussed alliance relationships and interoperability benefits. He didn't claim that American missiles alone allowed British pilots to achieve their kills. The mythmakers took his words and bent them into something he never said. None of this is to say American assistance was irrelevant. Caspar Weinberger provided crucial support in logistics and diplomatic backing. The United States made clear from the beginning that it would ultimately support its NATO ally over Argentina. Ascension Island served as a vital staging point. The alliance mattered. But there's a vast distance between America helped and America won the war for Britain. The first is true. The second is a myth that insults the operational achievement of British forces. And it insults your intelligence if you believe it. So let's examine what actually happened. Not the comfortable narrative, the uncomfortable facts. The two British aircraft carriers that would carry the burden of the air war, HMS Hermes and HMS Invincible, sailed south carrying approximately 20 Sea Harriers between them, a number that would grow to 28 as reinforcements arrived during the campaign. These weren't fleet carriers in the American sense. The USS Nimitz could launch 70 or 80 aircraft in sustained operations. Hermes and Invincible were STOVL carriers, designed around the vertical takeoff capabilities of the Harrier. Smaller, more limited, Their air groups would be outnumbered roughly 10 to 1 by the Argentine Air Force and naval aviation combined. And they would be operating with a handicap that no American carrier commander would have accepted: 0 airborne early warning capability. The Fairey Gannet AEW.3, the Royal Navy's last dedicated airborne early warning aircraft, had been retired in 1978. Part of the defence cuts that also eliminated the conventional carrier force. The decision made sense in the context of NATO planning, where the Royal Navy's primary mission was anti-submarine warfare in the North Atlantic, and American E-2 Hawkeyes would provide fleet air defence coverage. It made no sense at all in the context of a unilateral operation 8,000 miles from home against a capable enemy air force. An American E-2 Hawkeye would have provided detection ranges of 200 nautical miles or more. That's 15 to 20 minutes of warning before incoming strikes arrived. Time to vector fighters, time to position ships, time to think. The Sea Harrier's Blue Fox radar could detect low-flying strike aircraft at only 20 to 40 nautical miles. That's 2 to 7 minutes of warning. Barely enough to vector airborne fighters toward an incoming raid. Nowhere near enough to scramble additional aircraft or reposition ships for optimal defensive coverage. 2 minutes. Sometimes 7 if you were lucky. This single deficiency shaped every operational decision the British would make during the entire air war. Without AEW, the carriers themselves became desperately vulnerable to the Exocet anti-ship missiles that Argentina possessed. 5 AM-39 Exocets. That's all Argentina had for air launch. But 5 was enough to end the campaign if they found the carriers. The loss of a carrier wouldn't merely reduce available aircraft, it would effectively end the war. There was no fallback, no land bases within range of the Falklands, no alternate staging points. Lose the carriers and you lose the war. This existential vulnerability forced commanders to position the carriers far to the east, 150 to 200 miles from the islands. Far enough that Sea Harriers could barely reach the combat zone and maintain only 30 minutes of combat air patrol time over the Falklands. 30 minutes. In that window, pilots had to find, identify, and engage enemy aircraft that were flying below radar coverage and had no obligation to remain in the area after dropping their bombs. The Argentines could hit and run. The British had to be there before the hitting started, or they missed the fight entirely. The contrast with American carrier operations is instructive. A US Navy battle group in the 1980s operated with E-2 Hawkeyes, providing long-range surveillance. Backed by F-14 Tomcats, armed with Phoenix missiles, capable of engaging targets at 100 miles or more. The layered defense gave American commanders time and space to react to threats. Options, flexibility. The British had no layers. They had Sea Harriers with Blue Fox radars and AIM-9L missiles, destroyers with Sea Dart Type 21, frigates with Sea Wolf, and almost no time to employ any of them effectively. Every kill would have to be earned in the most compressed tactical environment imaginable. But here's the thing that demolishes the pigeon-shooting narrative entirely: the enemy. The mythmakers prefer to imagine the Argentine Air Force as a collection of incompetents flying obsolete equipment into the guns of technologically superior British forces. This fantasy bears no relationship to reality, and anyone who dismisses Argentine pilots doesn't understand what they accomplished. Argentine pilots flew their 1960s-era A-4 Skyhawks and IAI Daggers at extreme low altitudes, 30 to 60 feet above the ocean. At combat speeds, this isn't flying. It's controlled suicide, threading between wave tops with margins measured in inches. The slightest miscalculation, the smallest distraction, and the aircraft impacts the water at 400 miles per hour. They did this repeatedly, in formation, while navigating to targets, while setting up attack runs on defended ships surrounded by missiles and guns. The distance they had to travel compounded the challenge. Argentine strike aircraft operating from mainland bases had only 5 to 12 minutes of fuel available in the target area over the Falklands. They flew for an hour or more to reach the combat zone, made a single attack pass, then immediately had to turn for home before their fuel ran out. No margin for error. No opportunity for extended engagement. Every mission was a one-way commitment until the moment they turned for home. And what did these men achieve? They sank 7 British ships and severely damaged an 8th. With aircraft designed in the 1950s, without chaff dispensers, without radar warning receivers, without any of the countermeasures that modern combat aircraft carry as standard equipment. HMS Sheffield, HMS Ardent, HMS Coventry, HMS Antelope, MV Atlantic Conveyor, HMS Sir Galahad, HMS Sir Tristram, HMS Glamorgan damaged. 8 ships. Hundreds of British sailors killed or wounded. The bomb fusing problems, where many Argentine bombs hit British ships but failed to detonate because the low release altitude didn't give the fuses enough time to arm, don't diminish Argentine's skill. They reveal how close the war actually was. Had those bombs detonated, the casualty list would have been catastrophic. The campaign itself might have become untenable. This is what British forces faced. Not incompetent opposition flying into a technological trap. Brave men flying obsolete aircraft with suicidal courage, achieving results that shocked the world. The fact that Britain won the air war despite this opposition proves excellence, not luck. Proves adaptation, not just better missiles. So when someone asks, AIM-9L against planes with no chaff, nor RWR, what was the challenge? The answer should be obvious. The challenge was engaging aircraft flying at 30 feet above the water, where infrared seekers struggled to distinguish hot metal from sea clutter and terrain reflections. The challenge was getting into firing position when your radar detection range gave you maybe 4 minutes warning. The challenge was maintaining combat air patrols with 30 minutes of loiter time while the enemy could choose when and where to attack. The AIM-9L achieved an 87% success rate in the Falklands. That sounds impressive until you do the math. It means roughly 1 in 8 missiles failed to destroy their targets under conditions that should have been optimal. Britain's inventory was limited. Every miss mattered. And here's the statistic that breaks the myth completely. Of the approximately 45 Argentine aircraft destroyed in the air during the 74-day campaign, only 21 fell to Sea Harrier AIM-9L Sidewinders. 21, fewer than half. The remaining 24 were destroyed by other British systems. Sea Dart surface-to-air missiles from Type 42 destroyers accounted for 7 kills. Seawolf point defence systems on Type 22 frigates contributed 4 more. American-supplied Stinger man-portable missiles in the hands of British troops got 2. Rapier ground-based systems added another. Less than half the air-to-air kills came from the weapon that supposedly won the war single-handedly. The Sidewinder was a tool, an important tool, but it was one tool among many, and it wasn't even the majority contributor to British air defence success. If the AIM-9L had been the decisive factor, if American technology had done the work, you'd expect to see it dominating the kill statistics. You don't. You see a combined arms air defence that leveraged every system available, positioned and employed by commanders who understood their limitations and compensated with tactical ingenuity. The tactical reality of the air war looked nothing like the pigeon-shooting fantasy. Commander Nigel Ward, Sharkey Ward, commanding officer of 801 Naval Air Squadron, exemplified the close-quarters nature of the combat when he shot down an Argentine Pucara flown by Major Juan Tomba. Using his 30mm Aden cannon while flying at approximately 10 feet above ground level. 10 feet. This wasn't a standoff engagement conducted from beyond visual range with sophisticated missiles. This was pilots seeing each other's faces, measuring closure rates by instinct, employing cannon rounds in an environment where the smallest error meant collision with the ground. The AIM-9L received credit for many kills, but moments like this revealed the human element that no missile can replace. A pilot had to be there. A pilot had to make the shot. A pilot had to survive the engagement and return to the carrier to do it again the next day. And then there's the VIFF myth. VIFF, vectoring in forward flight. The Harrier's unique thrust vectoring capability that allows it to rapidly change direction in ways conventional aircraft cannot match. The maneuver supposedly gave Sea Harriers an insurmountable advantage in dogfights. Decelerate suddenly, force pursuing aircraft to overshoot, turn the tables on any opponent. Except it never happened. The famous Harrier VIFF maneuver was never actually used in combat during the Falklands War. Flight Lieutenant David Morgan, Britain's top-scoring pilot in the conflict, confirmed it was a defensive maneuver, and Sea Harriers were always on the offensive. Always. VIFF was trained, understood, and available as an option. But the tactical circumstances of the air war meant it was never employed in an actual engagement. The Sea Harriers won their battles through conventional fighter tactics, positioning, situational awareness, weapons employment, aggressive initiative. This matters because the VIFF myth feeds into the broader narrative that British success was technology-determined rather than skill-determined. If the Sea Harrier possessed a magical maneuver that guaranteed victory, then the pilots were merely operators pushing buttons. The truth is that Sea Harrier pilots succeeded through training, doctrine, and the kind of aggressive decision-making that characterizes elite fighter squadrons everywhere. They trusted their radar more than their opponents expected. Some squadrons actively trained with and trusted the Blue Fox radar, achieving better interception results than squadrons that relied purely on visual detection. This wasn't equipment superiority. This was doctrinal choice. They positioned their CAPs to exploit Argentine fuel constraints. Those 5 to 12 minutes of loiter time over the target area? British controllers learned to anticipate when Argentine formations would be at their most vulnerable, fuel critical, committed to attack runs, unable to disengage and maneuver. The timing was British. The positioning was British. The decision-making was British. They flew into gun range when missiles failed and killed opponents with cannon fire. When the sophisticated technology didn't work, they fell back on skills as old as air combat itself. None of this was written in any equipment manual. The comfortable assumption that British technological superiority would neutralize Argentine attacks died on May 4, 1982. HMS Sheffield became the first Royal Navy ship lost to enemy action since World War II. Hit by an Exocet anti-ship missile launched from an Argentine super-étendard. The missile's warhead malfunctioned. It didn't actually explode on impact, but the burning rocket fuel ignited fires that the crew couldn't control. 20 men died. The ship was eventually lost. And the psychological impact went far beyond the casualty count. Sheffield's loss forced immediate tactical changes throughout the fleet. This was adaptation under fire, the defining characteristic of British operational excellence during the campaign. No peacetime doctrine had prepared the task force for this specific threat in this specific environment. The Exocet was a known system, but its employment by Argentine naval aviation from extreme range, using aerial refueling to extend the Super Étendard's reach, hadn't been fully anticipated. The response had to be improvised. Ships that had been operating with radar systems in standby to avoid electronic detection began maintaining constant coverage, accepting the signature risk in exchange for earlier warning of incoming missiles. The picket ships operating forward of the carriers were repositioned with the explicit understanding that they existed to absorb missile attacks. Sacrificial. Everyone knew it. Everyone accepted it. The entire posture of the fleet shifted from measured confidence to active paranoia. Every radar contact analyzed for the possibility that it might be the next Exocet. Every aircraft identified before it closed to weapons range. And it worked. After Sheffield, no Exocet successfully struck a major British warship for the remainder of the campaign. Not because the threat disappeared, not because Argentina ran out of missiles. They had a limited inventory, but they kept trying. It didn't work because the British learned faster than the Argentines could adapt their tactics. This is operational excellence. This is what wins campaigns. The landings on May 21st brought the vulnerable transport ships into the confined waters of San Carlos Water. Bomb alley. Argentine pilots responded with ferocity. What followed was some of the most intense air combat since Vietnam. Compressed into a space of days rather than months, pilots on both sides pushed to their limits and beyond. HMS Ardent was hit by 17 bombs on May 21st. 17. 22 sailors killed. The ship sank the following day. HMS Antelope took 2 bombs on May 23rd. One lodged in the engine room. When disposal experts tried to defuse it, it detonated. The explosion broke the ship's back. HMS Coventry and MV Atlantic Conveyor were both lost on May 25th, Argentina's National Day. Coventry to 4 Skyhawks. Atlantic Conveyor to one of the remaining Exocets. The conveyor was carrying critical supplies, including Chinook helicopters. Her loss forced British forces to walk across East Falkland instead of being airlifted. This wasn't pigeon shooting. This was a knife fight, and the British were taking casualties. But they adapted. Every loss taught lessons that were implemented immediately, not after the war, in comfortable after-action reviews, during the war, while ships were still burning. The task force changed procedures, repositioned assets, adjusted tactics based on what they'd learned watching their colleagues die. The Argentine Air Force, for all its bravery, couldn't adapt as quickly. Their operational constraints, the fuel limitations, the distance from mainland bases, the limited Exocet inventory, the bomb-fusing problems they never solved, meant they were essentially fighting the same way every day. The British weren't. The British evolved, and the kill ratio reflected it. 28 Sea Harriers achieved 28 air-to-air kills without losing a single aircraft to enemy fighters. Not one. 0 losses in air-to-air combat. 28 to 0. 6 Sea Harriers were lost during the campaign, 2 to ground fire, 2 to accidents, 2 to unknown causes in bad weather. None to Argentine aircraft. When critics say the AIM-9L made this possible, that the all-aspect capability allowed pilots to engage from angles previously impossible, they're not wrong about the technology. They're wrong about what the technology required. The AIM-9L had to be aimed. A pilot had to achieve the geometric and energy conditions for a successful engagement. A pilot had to decide when to fire and when to hold. A pilot had to maintain situational awareness in an environment where the warning time was measured in minutes and the enemy was coming in at 30 feet above the waves. Give the same missiles to a squadron with inferior training. Give them to pilots who don't trust their radar. Give them to commanders who don't understand how to position CAPs against fuel-constrained attackers. Give them to a force that can't adapt after Sheffield burns. You don't get that kind of kill ratio. You might not win the war at all. The logistics of projecting air power 8,000 miles from home deserve attention because they're part of the British achievement that gets erased by the American technology narrative. The United States Navy operates from bases across the Pacific, the Atlantic, the Mediterranean. American carriers can reach countless ports for resupply, maintenance, crew rest. When something breaks, parts arrive on logistics flights from established supply chains. Britain had Ascension Island, a volcanic rock roughly halfway between the UK and the Falklands. And then, nothing. 8,000 miles of ocean, no allies in the theatre, no friendly ports south of Ascension. Everything, fuel, ammunition, food, spare parts, replacement aircraft, had to be brought by sea. The task force had to sustain itself. Hermes and Invincible weren't designed for this. They were built for Cold War operations in the North Atlantic, where they'd be resupplied from UK ports every few weeks. Sustained independent operations in the South Atlantic, that wasn't in the manual. But they did it anyway. Maintenance crews kept aircraft flying with improvised repairs and parts cannibalized from damaged machines. Flight operations continued in weather that would have grounded aircraft anywhere else. The tempo, the number of sorties generated per aircraft per day, exceeded what planners had thought possible from carriers that small, with air groups that stretched. This was a British solution to a British problem. American missiles didn't maintain the aircraft. American satellites didn't stock the spare parts lockers. American technology didn't make the maintenance chiefs perform miracles with inadequate resources. When the campaign ended on June 14, 1982, the statistics told a story that should have settled the argument forever. 28 Sea Harriers had defended the task force. They flew approximately 1,190 combat air patrol sorties. They achieved 28 air-to-air kills. They lost 0 aircraft to enemy fighters. They maintained operational tempo for 74 days at the edge of the world. And they did it without airborne early warning, without adequate spare parts chains, without the warning time that any other air force would consider minimally acceptable. The AIM-9L Sidewinders were American-made. So were components in countless other systems. Britain sourced equipment internationally because every military does. The engines in some aircraft, electronics in some sensors. This proves nothing except that defense industrial supply chains are global. What it doesn't prove is that America won the war. Because missiles don't position carriers. Missiles don't adapt tactics mid-campaign after watching Sheffield burn. Missiles don't fly 8,000 miles from home with no early warning and maintain combat air patrols with 30-minute loiter times against a determined enemy flying at treetop height. Missiles don't train pilots to trust imperfect radar in an environment where seconds matter. Missiles don't coordinate layered defenses using Sea Dart, Sea Wolf, Rapier and Stinger to achieve the kills that the Sidewinder didn't. Missiles don't learn from every loss and implement new procedures while the battle is still being fought. Britain asked America for tools. Britain provided the tradecraft. The 40-year myth has it exactly backwards. Caspar Weinberger earned his knighthood for being a good ally, for choosing to support Britain when his own State Department wanted neutrality, for expediting what assistance America could provide. That's worth honouring. Allies helping each other during crises is how alliances survive. But conflating American help with American victory isn't honouring Weinberger's assistance. It's diminishing British achievement to score points in arguments that have nothing to do with historical accuracy. The men who flew Sea Harriers off those carriers, Ward, Morgan and their squadrons, didn't win because someone handed them superior missiles. They won because they were better at the thing that fighter pilots have to be good at, making correct decisions faster than the other guy, under conditions that would overwhelm anyone without intensive training and the right temperament. The commanders who repositioned the fleet after Sheffield didn't save the carriers because satellites told them what to do. They saved the carriers because they understood their own vulnerabilities, adapted their procedures, and outthought an enemy who couldn't change tactics as quickly. The maintenance crews who kept those 28 Harriers operational didn't achieve impossible sortie rates because of American spare parts. They achieved them through improvisation, skill, and the kind of bloody-minded determination that has won British campaigns for centuries. This is what the evidence shows. Not that American equipment was irrelevant. Equipment matters. Not that Argentina was incompetent. They were brave and skilled, and they sank 7 ships and damaged an 8th to prove it. Not that Britain fought alone. Allies contributed, and that contribution is worth acknowledging. What the evidence shows is that operational excellence was decisive. Training was decisive. Adaptation under fire was decisive. The will to learn from every failure and implement corrections while the battle was still being fought, that was decisive. You can give good missiles to bad pilots. You'll get bad results. You can give limited resources to excellent operators. You'll get the Falklands Air War, 28-0 in air-to-air combat, 45 Argentine aircraft destroyed by British defences, a carrier task force preserved despite operating without adequate warning time in an environment that should have been catastrophic against an enemy that pressed attacks with courage that deserves respect. The proof isn't that Britain didn't use American missiles. They did. The proof is in what they accomplished with those missiles, under constraints that would have defeated a less capable force, against opposition that any honest analysis must acknowledge was skilled and brave. For 40 years, the myth has held that Britain was rescued, that American technology did the work, that without Washington's largesse, the task force would have scattered across the South Atlantic. The men who fought that war deserved better than 40 years of this nonsense. The record has been corrected. Subscribe for more stories like this.